I have replaced 2 furnaces, 4 transmissions, one entire back deck, and a marriage that didn't survive its own foundation. I did not expect my heart to be next. The cardiologist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Ferreira, who couldn't have been older than 45, told me that a triple bypass at 71 was, in her words, a very manageable procedure these days. She said it the way people say fender bender when it isn't their chest being opened. I nodded politely. I have been nodding politely for 71 years. It has never once served me well. My name is Walter Briggs. I spent 38 years as a master electrician in Toledo, Ohio, wiring houses, running conduit, teaching apprentices how to respect a live circuit. I know exactly how much current a system can carry before something burns. I never thought I'd have to apply that math to my own children. I told my 2 sons and my daughter about the surgery 7 weeks before the date. 7 weeks. Hold that number. Not 7 hours. Not 7 days. 7 full weeks, 49 days, during which any one of them could have marked a calendar, found a sitter, asked their boss for a single afternoon, or driven the 2 hours up I-75 to sit with their father before they put him under. I'm going to tell you what each of them did with those 49 days. Dennis, my oldest, is 51. He called me on a Sunday night. I could hear a football game behind him, and that particular rhythm to his voice that told me he was also texting someone at the same time. He said, "Dad, don't you worry. We've got this covered." Then, with what I can only call impressive timing, he asked whether I'd ever thought about putting the house on Larchwood in a trust, just so things were clean down the road. Just curious, just planning ahead. Marissa, my middle child, sent me a voicemail, 5 minutes and 11 seconds. I know because I played it twice, waiting for a plan to appear somewhere inside all that sorrow. She was devastated about the timing. Work had gone insane. Her husband Curtis had something with his mother that same week. The kids had a swim meet. She would for certain, absolutely, 100% be there. She just had to see how the schedule shook out. She used the phrase, "I promised Dad," 3 times in 5 minutes, which is, I believe, some kind of record for promising without producing an actual promise. And then there was Julian, my youngest. Julian called me on a Thursday afternoon, 17 days before my surgery. I was standing in my garage, running my hand along an old workbench I built the year he was born, and I felt something warm and foolish in my chest when I saw his name light up my phone. The kind of warmth you keep feeling for a person no matter how many times they've let you down, because some part of you refuses to stop hoping. I picked up on the first ring. He asked how I was holding up about the surgery. I told him I was scared but ready. He said that was good. That was healthy. Then there was a pause. I have known that particular pause since he was 17 years old, and it always means the same thing. He said he hated to even bring it up right now, of all times, but his truck payment was 2 months behind and the bank had called twice. Could I help him out, just this once, and he'd pay me back the second things settled down? He is 34 years old. I said yes, because I am his father, and I have never once in his life said no to him, which I am starting to understand may have been the whole problem. I sent the money from my phone while he was still talking. He said, "You're the best, Dad. Try not to stress about Tuesday." And he hung up. He did not call the morning of my surgery. He did not call that night. As far as I can tell, he did not think about that surgery again once the money cleared. I want to tell you about the morning I checked myself in, because I've never told anyone this part. I woke up at 5 in the morning in my house on Larchwood Avenue, the house I bought in 1979 with an electrician's salary and a lot of overtime. A house is quiet in a particular way when only one man lives in it. Not peaceful. Waited. I made coffee I wasn't allowed to drink and sat at my kitchen table watching the sky turn gray over the Maumee River behind my property line. And I thought, if I don't wake up from this, the last thing my youngest son ever said to me was a request for truck money. I sat with that thought a good long while. Then I called a cab, because at 71 I don't trust rideshare apps, and I went to the hospital by myself. They kept me 11 days. A triple bypass is not the small thing people pretend it is when they're not the one on the table. There's a pain that visits you at 3 in the morning like it's got nowhere better to be. There's the humiliation of a walker and a bedpan and a nurse helping you do things you've handled on your own since Eisenhower was president. And there's a particular loneliness that only exists in a hospital room, not the loneliness of living alone, which I'd made my peace with years ago, but the loneliness of being surrounded by beeping monitors and other families' voices drifting in from the hallway and having an empty chair beside your own bed. That chair. Green vinyl, one leg shorter than the others so it rocked if you leaned on the armrest. I looked at that chair every single day. I know it the way you know a scar. Dennis called on day 3 and day 7. Day 3, he asked how the surgery went. Day 7, he asked, very casually, whether I'd talked to anybody about the house yet. No pressure. Just wanted to make sure everything was squared away in case anything ever happened to me. I told him everything was squared away and had been since 1979. Marissa called nearly every day, which sounds devoted until you notice each call ran about 4 minutes and consisted almost entirely of reasons she hadn't come yet, plus promises about when she would. The reasons were inventive, I'll give her credit. A flat tire that turned into 2 flat tires. A dentist appointment for one of the kids that got moved up. A work call that ran long. On day 8, she told me she was for certain coming on day 10. On day 10, she did not come. She sent a text. Dad, I am so sorry. Something came up. I'll explain when I see you. Love you so much. I read that text twice. I set the phone down on the little rolling tray beside my bed. I looked at that green vinyl chair, and I felt something move inside my chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. Not sudden, not loud. The way a foundation settles, slow and permanent, the kind of shift you don't notice until the door won't close right anymore. Julian never called again after the money went through. Not once in 11 days. On day 9, a nurse named Patrice, a heavy-set woman in her late 50s with the kind of calm that comes from 30 years of watching people at their worst, came in to check my vitals and caught me staring at the empty chair. She glanced at it, then looked back at me. Do you have people, Mr. Briggs? She asked. Gentle as anything. I said, I do. I even smiled saying it. She nodded slow, the way a person nods when they understand something you didn't actually say out loud, and finished with the blood pressure cuff. Before she left the room, she put her hand on my shoulder for just a second and said, You call for me if you need anything. Anything at all, you hear? I've thought about that hand on my shoulder every day since. On day 11, Doctor. Ferreira signed my discharge papers, told me my heart looked 10 years younger than it had going in, and shook my hand like we'd built something together, which I suppose we had. A hospital volunteer wheeled me out to the curb, hospital policy, mandatory, which struck me as both kind and a little absurd, given nobody was waiting to receive me. I called that same cab company. The driver, a young man named Marcus, asked if I'd had a good stay. I told him it was a hospital. He laughed at that, and we drove the 20 minutes back to Larchwood in a comfortable kind of silence, the kind you choose rather than the kind forced on you. He helped me up the porch steps with my bag. I thanked him. He gave me a look young men give when they sense something is going on but don't quite know what, and he drove off. I stood at my own front door a minute before I went in. I don't fully know why. My chest ached under the bandages. I had a walker and a paper sack of pill bottles. There was no earthly reason to stand there like a stranger waiting to be let into his own life. But I stood there. I looked at the brass door knocker I'd installed the same summer Julian was born, the porch light I'd rewired twice, the little split in the second step I kept meaning to fix. I went in. The house was exactly the way I'd left it 11 days before. That sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. When you live alone and you're gone 11 days and you come home to find everything exactly, precisely as you left it, that tells you something specific. It means nobody came. Nobody watered the tomato plants on the back steps. Nobody grabbed the mail piling up against the storm door. Nobody so much as stood in my kitchen to make sure the place was still standing. Nobody came. I set my bag down slow. I moved through my own kitchen the way a man moves when his body is still negotiating terms with itself. I filled the kettle. I put it on the stove. I stood at the window over the sink and looked out at my yard, the tomato plants gone leggy without me, the old maple I'd hung a tire swing from 30 years back for grandchildren who rarely came to swing on it, The tool shed I built with my own two hands the year I retired. Everything exactly as I'd left it. I thought about that green vinyl chair sitting empty in room 214, day after day, tilting a little to one side, waiting on someone who never showed. I thought about Patrice asking if I had people, and the smile that cost me more than I've admitted to anyone until right now. I thought about Julian's voice saying, "You're the best, Dad," and then 11 days of nothing. I thought about what it means to love people. I loved my children the way I wired a house carefully, with the right materials, thinking about what needed to last 50 years, not what looked good for the inspector standing there that one afternoon. Love isn't a transaction. It isn't a performance you put on when there's something worth performing for. I made my tea. I carried it careful to my recliner by the window, the one I've had since 1994, the one with the flattened cushion shaped exactly like me. I sat. The afternoon light came in low and gold through the maple leaves. I sat there a long while, just sat. The house was quiet around me, not the good kind of quiet, not a Sunday morning alone with your coffee kind of quiet, the other kind, the kind with weight to it. I had 11 days to understand some things about my life that I'd been too polite to look at directly before. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and picked up the phone. Not to call Dennis, not Marissa, not Julian. I called Harold Pruitt, my attorney for 22 years, since he handled my divorce and did it without ever once making me feel small for needing help. Time to do a little rewiring. Let me tell you something about electricians. We don't react to a spark. We trace it. There's a difference. And the difference is everything. Reacting is pulling wires out with your bare hands and hoping for the best. Tracing is shutting off the breaker, finding the short, and fixing it so it never happens again. Harold has been patient and precise with me for 22 years, two qualities I respect more than almost anything, having spent 38 years around contractors who had neither. When I called him from my kitchen that October evening, still tender under my shirt, still moving slow, he listened without a single interruption for nearly 10 minutes while I told him what I wanted done. When I finished, he went quiet. Then he said, "Walter, you sure about this?" I told him I'd been sure since day 8. He said he'd have the paperwork drawn up inside the week. Outside my window, the Toledo sky went dark over the river, and the street settled into its evening sounds. Somebody's sprinkler 2 doors down, a dog barking at nothing. A Norfolk Southern train rattling through a mile off. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a life that keeps right on going whether anybody shows up for it or not. 5 weeks after I got home, I called all 3 of my children and invited them to Sunday dinner. I want to be honest about why. Because honesty matters to me. I wasn't performing weakness, and I wasn't exactly setting a trap. I was doing something simpler than either of those things. I was giving them a chance to show me plainly who they were, and then I was going to remember it. I made my late wife's pot roast, the recipe she wrote out in her own hand the year we got married, which I have never once shared with anybody and am not about to start now. I set the table with the good plates. I put a Nat King Cole record on low. By every outward measure, I was a warm 71-year-old man, glad to have his family under his roof again. Dennis arrived first, same as always, because Dennis has always understood that arriving first is itself a kind of statement reliable, devoted, the responsible one. He came in with a bottle of scotch that ran him $50 if it ran him a dime, and the energy of a man who'd rehearsed his entrance in the truck on the way over. He hugged me a beat longer than he needed to. Then his eyes moved across my living room, the crown molding, the mantel, the built-in bookcase I put in myself back in '91 into the kitchen, the cabinets, back out to the living room. A quick appraisal wearing the mask of a warm smile. "Place looks real good, Dad," he said. "It looks exactly how it's always looked," I told him. "I know. It just looks good," he said again. Marissa arrived close to on time, breathless, holding a grocery store pie like it might apologize on her behalf. She hugged me a long moment, and I could feel her relief at finding me upright and functioning. Then she sat, and, with the careful architecture of a woman who'd been rehearsing for 5 weeks, launched into the explanation. I won't give it the dignity of repeating in full. There was a flat tire. There was Curtis's mother. There was a swim meet. There was, memorably, a plumbing issue I am fairly certain never existed. She said I felt so guilty 3 separate times, which is always curious, because people who truly feel guilty tend to move heaven and earth rather than let the guilt sit there unattended. I told her I understood completely. She let out a breath like she'd been carrying something heavy. I passed the pot roast. Julian came in last, 30 minutes after I'd said to come, wearing the particular look he's worn since he was 16, like life is a waiting room, and something better is always one door over. He kissed my cheek. He sat down. He did not bring up the hospital. He did not bring up the money. He picked up his fork and asked what was in the gravy. He checked his phone twice before we were halfway through the meal. I watched all three of them. The way Dennis's eyes kept drifting to the bookcase. The way Marissa laughed a half-second too fast at everything I said. The way Julian ate like a man with no idea he was being measured for anything. Then I set my fork down. "I've been thinking about something," I said, "since the surgery." The table shifted, just slightly. The way a room shifts when everyone's attention quietly sharpens, without anybody moving a muscle. "I'm an electrician. I notice a change in load. At 71, I said, it doesn't hurt to get your affairs in order. I've been working with Harold on a few things. Just making sure everything's where it needs to be when the time comes." Dennis said, "Careful as a man walking on ice. That's real smart, Dad." Marissa said, "Of course. That's so responsible of you." I picked up my fork and said, "More pot roast?" What came next unfolded over the following months with the slow certainty of something wired correctly the first time. Dennis started calling every Sunday at 11 sharp, not 10:45, not 11:15, 11 precise as a measurement. He'd ask about my heart, my blood pressure, my appetite, my knees. Then, always about 15 minutes in, he'd find a natural way to mention the house. Had I looked into a reverse mortgage? Was I keeping current on the property taxes? Just practical things. Just thinking ahead, Dad. Marissa started showing up Wednesdays with real groceries. Not gas station flowers and a bag of chips, actual, considered groceries. The coffee I like. The rye bread. Soup, she remembered, was my favorite. She was warm and easy to sit with, and genuinely good company, and sitting across from her at my own kitchen table on those Wednesday afternoons, I felt something I hadn't braced myself for: grief. Not for what was happening now, but for what could have been happening the whole time. For the version of Marissa who might have shown up on day 2, or day 5, or any single day out of 11, and sat down in that green vinyl chair and just stayed a while. That Marissa, with her real groceries and her real attention, had been sitting right there inside her the entire time. Julian even texted. Short ones. Half the words missing. "Hey Pop, how you feeling? Cold out there, stay warm, old man." And once, a photo of the sunset over the river with no caption at all, which I took as his version of poetry. I answered every one of them in full sentences with proper punctuation, because I'm 71 and I was raised to write like a person raised me. They called. They visited. They performed the devotion that should have been free, now offered up like an investment with a maturity date. I let them in every time. I cooked. I laughed. I asked about their lives. I never once brought up the hospital, not a hint, not a sideways remark, not even a loaded silence. I gave them nothing to defend against, nothing to apologize for, nothing to negotiate. The hospital had already happened. I'd already sat with it, alone, the way I've sat with most things in my life. I didn't need an apology. I needed them to understand. And in my experience, understanding doesn't come from a conversation. It comes from consequence. And the consequence was already sitting in a folder in Harold's office. It's a Saturday morning in March now, 5 months out from the surgery, and I'm on my front porch on Larchwood with black coffee and the particular satisfaction of a man whose affairs are finally in order. Toledo in March can't decide if it's still winter. The Forsythia out front is thinking about it. Somewhere down the block, a kid is trying and failing to get a lawnmower started too early in the season. A cardinal lands on my porch rail, sits there about 10 seconds, looks at me with the flat indifference of a creature that doesn't owe anybody a single thing, and then it's gone. I think about that bird more than is probably reasonable for a grown man. My chest feels good. Better than good. Dr. Ferreira did fine work. I walk 2 miles most mornings now, more than I walked before any of this happened, which I suppose means the whole business did me some good even while it exposed some rot I hadn't wanted to look at. I made a donation last month to the cardiac unit, specifically to a fund that buys better chairs for family members waiting through long nights, the kind of chairs that don't rock on a short leg. I put it in Patrice's name. I never told her. I didn't need to. There are 3 charities in my will now where 3 children's names used to sit. One is a scholarship for kids going into the electrical trades at the vocational school on Dorr Street, because I believe a young person with the right skills and the right tools is about the most durable thing a man can leave behind. One is a heart health fund at the hospital that fixed me. And one is a fund for elderly folks living alone, for home visits and check-ins, because there are people out there with nobody, and I now understand better than most exactly what that feels like. The house on Larchwood, 4 bedrooms, the porch I rebuilt in '02, the maple with the tire swing, the workbench I built the year Julian was born goes to the estate to be sold, proceeds split between those 3 funds. Harold's known since the week I got home. He is a patient, precise man, and he'll see it done exactly as I've laid it out. There's one more document in that file. A letter, 1 page, written out by hand, in the block printing 38 years of electrical schematics trained into me. It's addressed to Dennis, Marissa, and Julian, to be opened after I'm gone. It says this: by the time you read this, you'll have questions, and I want to answer the one that matters most, because I spent my whole working life believing in accurate wiring and accurate information both. I had a triple bypass. I was in the hospital 11 days. I came home in a cab I called myself. I told you the date 7 weeks ahead of time. 7 weeks. I want that number to be exact, because precision has always mattered to me. I'm not writing this angry. I'm writing it because you deserve to know the reason behind every wire in this circuit. In my trade, we call it tracing the fault back to its source. In a family, I suppose there's other words for it. This house was built solid, and I kept it that way for 45 years. I hope the money does some good somewhere. I love you. That part never changed. Not for one single day. Dad. Marissa comes by around 11 with a coffee cake, wearing the same brightness of a woman who's decided today will be a good visit. She calls out, "Dad?" From the gate, even though she can see me plain as day sitting right there, a habit she's had since she was 7 years old that I've always found privately sweet. She takes the other porch chair. We talk about her daughter's science fair project and the price of gas, and whether it'll warm up enough to get the tomatoes in early this year. She's good company. She always was, underneath. I watch her over the rim of my mug. 32 years old, my Marissa, with her mother's same laugh. She asks real questions and listens to the answers. She is, in this exact moment, in the March sun, in her father's other porch chair, genuinely likable. I love her. That part isn't complicated at all. You can love somebody completely and still change your will. You can love somebody and still let a consequence be a consequence. You can love somebody with your whole chest and still refuse to pretend that 11 empty days in a hospital room were something other than exactly what they were. She has no idea. She thinks she's out here drinking coffee with a grateful old man whose trust she's been quietly rebuilding, whose house she's slowly, warmly, earning her way back into. And in the ways that actually matter, the human ways, the father ways, she's not wrong. The Wednesday groceries and the real conversation gave me back a daughter I'd stopped expecting to see again. I'm grateful for that, truly. The paperwork just doesn't know anything about Wednesday mornings. Dennis calls Sunday at 11, right on schedule. We talk 18 minutes. He asks about my sleep, my appetite, my knees. Then, right on cue, he mentions a house 2 streets over that just sold for more than anybody expected. Just something he noticed. Just thinking about the market, Dad. I say. Anyway, he says, you know we're all here for you, whatever you need. I look out past the porch rail at the forsythia, which has made up its mind and started blooming without asking anybody's permission. I know you are, Dennis, I tell him. I know. Julian calls on a Tuesday, which has never happened before in the history of our relationship. He asks, no lead up at all, whether I'd want to grab lunch sometime, just the 2 of us. Says he's been thinking about things. Says, and this lands somewhere different than anything else has landed all year. I feel like I don't really know you, Pop. That a strange thing to say? I sit with that a moment. It isn't strange at all. It might be the truest thing he's said to me in a decade. It's also, I note with the detached clarity of a man who filed his paperwork about 5 months too late, still true. I tell him it's not strange in the slightest. That I'd like that very much. We get lunch that Saturday at a diner on Monroe Street. He orders a burger. I order eggs. We talk 2 hours straight, longer than we've talked in years, none of it about money, none of it about the house, none of it about the careful performance of a good son, just talking. He tells me about a woman he's been seeing, which is new. Tells me he's thinking about going back to school for HVAC certification, which is also new. Asks me what it was actually like, wiring houses for 38 years, in a way that tells me he's genuinely curious and just never thought to ask before now. I tell him about the apartment complex fire on Airport Highway in '88, and how a bad ground almost took the whole East Wing, and how I stood in front of the fire marshal, explaining exactly what went wrong and why it wasn't going to happen again on my watch. He listens. He laughs in the right spots. He says, "I never knew any of that. You never asked." I tell him, gentle, no edge to it, just fact. He goes quiet a second. Then he says, "I'm sorry I didn't come to the hospital, Pop. I've been trying to figure out how to say that for months now." I look at him across that diner table, my youngest boy, burger going cold, and I feel the whole complicated weight of being somebody's father, the love that never once asked to be earned, the wound that doesn't need theatrics to be real, the forgiveness that isn't the same thing as forgetting. I know, I tell him. I don't say it's fine, because it wasn't fine. I don't say don't worry about it, because he ought to worry about it, a little. I don't say the will's already changed, and none of you are in it. I say I know, and I mean every word of it, and I pick my coffee back up, and we keep on talking. It's a Saturday now, early April, and I'm out back working the tomato beds on Larchwood. The forsythia's come, and mostly gone already. It comes back every single year. No drama, no announcement, no waiting on anybody to notice. It just comes back. I planted that bush the year I bought this house, and it's outlasted more than I ever expected it to, and it'll very likely outlast me too, which doesn't strike me as sad so much as it strikes me as reasonable. I'm 71 years old. I had a triple bypass. I came home in a cab. I rewrote my will. I've had pot roast with my kids more times since than I can easily count, and in the ways still available to them, they are good company. They think they're inheriting this house. What they're actually inheriting is Sunday phone calls and Wednesday groceries and burgers on Monroe Street and a father who, in spite of everything, is still glad to see them walk through his door. That's what's left to give. The paperwork's in Harold's office. The Cardinal's back on the rail, same one, maybe, probably not. Either way, he's watching me with that same flat royal indifference, a creature who owes nobody a visit, coming and going entirely on his own terms. I raise my mug at him. "Morning," I tell him. He stays about 9 seconds. Then he's gone, same as always. I go back to my tomatoes. The thing about electrical work that people who've never done it tend not to understand is that the best work is invisible. It's the wire behind the wall nobody ever sees, the ground fault that never trips because you did it right the first time, the connection that holds for 50 years while everybody living in that house forgets there was ever a decision made about it at all. I built this house's wiring to last. I built my family the same way, best I knew how carefully, with the right materials, thinking about what would hold rather than what looked good for one afternoon. When my time comes, Harold will open a folder, make a few calls, and everything will go exactly where I decided it should go, back in October, sitting alone in my kitchen with tea going cold and a walker by the door, and 11 days of clear information about the people I raised. In my trade, we'd call that a solid circuit. My children will likely call it something else entirely. I won't be around to hear what. And sitting out here on an April morning with dirt on my hands and a ghost of a cardinal somewhere overhead that turns out to be about the least troubling thought I've had in a long, long while.